I said don't move. His heart lurched at the low, melodic voice drifting through the swirling dust. Valen froze, boots scraping on the cracked floor of the old outpost corridor, dust motes catching in the faintest sliver of greenish glow from a malfunctioning overhead tube. The creature who spoke was half hidden in shadows, but her form was tantalizingly outlined by shimmering bioluminescent patterns that pulsed along her slender neck and down over what looked like sinuous arms. He cleared his throat, but the dryness lingered there. I'm not moving, he managed, careful to keep his voice low. Just looking for a place to rest. He tried to see her features more clearly. All he could make out was a lean silhouette, and a faint glow from the swirling markings on her skin. There was a moment of extended silence, as if she was deciding whether to believe him. Finally, the shape shifted toward him, and he thought he heard the soft click of something like claws against the metal flooring. Your steps are loud, she said, voice deepened by something more than just an alien physiology. There was tension in it, an undercurrent of challenge. What do you want here? She asked, and he recognized that this was more than just a question. It was a warning to tread carefully. He exhaled slowly. I'm just passing through. There was a distress beacon, he explained, gesturing vaguely down the corridor. And I came to see if anyone needed help. I'm not looking for trouble. As a former pilot turned scavenger, he'd made his peace with haunted places like this. Derelict outposts scattered at the far edges of the galaxy could hide all manner of wonders and horrors. Still, in all his travels, he'd never encountered a figure who looked quite like her. Her glow brightened slightly, as though the swirl of color across her skin was an emotional response. He stepped a fraction closer, not enough to threaten but enough to catch a better glimpse. She had a high, crest-like structure that swept back from her forehead in graceful arcs, shimmering lines that might be veins or purely decorative pulses of bioluminescence. Her eyes were wide, reflecting faint light, and he caught the tilt of her chin as she studied him, probably deciding if he was friend or foe. Trouble follows outsiders, she murmured, and then those wide eyes slid down to his sidearm. He let out a breath, careful not to make a sudden move. I won't shoot, he said, painfully aware of the dryness in his mouth. She stepped forward again, her bare feet whispering on the floor. He couldn't help noticing she was tall, nearly at his eye level. The swirling lights along her arms and neck flickered in an almost hypnotic pattern. You came because of a beacon, she repeated, as though unsure. Then, her expression turned guarded. I am Amathea. I was searching for the same. She shifted her stance, and in that movement he glimpsed something like a slender tail curled behind her leg. It bristled for an instant, then relaxed. Valen lowered his head in acknowledgement. I'm Valen, he said. His eyes kept flicking to that mesmerizing glow across her face, an odd combination of delicate lines and bold luminescent patches that reminded him of swirling galaxies. You're alone? He asked gently, not wanting to pry. Amathea hesitated, her gaze flickering down the corridor to where a collapsed bulkhead lay. Yes, she said at last, voice dropping with something like reluctance. It's complicated. I came here to find. She broke off. There's a rumor of an artifact that might help my kind. Valen tried to read her expression, but the alien nature of her features made that nearly impossible. Yet her posture told him she was nervous, her weight shifting from foot to foot. He sensed she was prepared to bolt at any second if she decided she couldn't trust him. Carefully, he turned his body, showing he carried no threat. If there's something you need, maybe we can help each other. He saw the bioluminescent lines on her shoulders pulse. She seemed to consider, glancing over him. The outpost has been abandoned for a decade, she said, voice hushed as though the dusty corridors themselves might be listening. Most of the upper levels were scavenged. But they missed the lower vault, I think. The signal came from there, or so I deduce. I've been trying to find a path down, but the main shaft is collapsed. Valen nodded. I saw that. Maybe we can clear it or find an alternate route. He paused, letting the silence drag between them. He could almost feel her indecision in the air, like a static charge. Look, he added more softly, I can't do it alone. If you're here for something important, maybe we watch each other's backs. Her gaze remained steady, but after a moment, she gave a slight nod. Then she stepped closer, close enough that his chest tightened with awareness. He hadn't realized how warm she must be, or perhaps the temperature difference between them was setting his senses on edge. She lifted a hand, slender fingers tipped with tiny, curved nails, and pressed it lightly against his chest. Her eyes flickered shut, and then reopened, as if feeling his heartbeat. Your heart is racing, she observed, a subtle curve at the edge of her lips. His breath caught. He didn't move away, nor did he lean in, just letting her hand rest there. I'm not used to finding anyone alive in these derelicts, he said, letting out a half-laugh that sounded more nervous than confident. She didn't smile exactly, but there was an expression he took for amusement. I am not used to humans, she answered, voice dropping into an intimate hush. But you do not smell like fear. He swallowed thickly. Should I be afraid? Her lips parted slightly, revealing a flash of pointed teeth. Many men would be. Maybe you'll surprise me. She seemed to relish the tension, letting it hang in the air. Then, in a swift motion, she withdrew her hand and started walking. Come. We can speak more once we find a safer spot. Valen followed, still trying to process the surreal moment. He'd come here expecting trouble, maybe salvageable tech or leftover supplies. Instead, he'd found a mysterious alien woman on a desperate search. And somehow, she seemed to find him more fascinating than threatening. Something about her whispered danger, and yet, an undeniable spark of intrigue burned in his chest. They moved through the corridors, stepping over twisted metal beams and broken glass. The flicker of overhead lights was intermittent, leaving them in stretches of near darkness. Yet she navigated the gloom with uncanny certainty. At one point, Valen nearly stumbled over a half-collapsed floor panel. Amethea grasped him by the arm, steadying him. Her touch was as surprising as before. She had an almost electric warmth that shot straight through him. Her fingers lingered a second too long before she released him. They continued this way, forging deeper into the outpost skeleton. Valen found himself walking behind her, watching the gentle sway of her hips beneath a flowing garment that looked more ceremonial than protective. It clung to her curves and left her bare arms and shoulders visible, the luminescent lines shimmering with her every breath. He swallowed, trying not to stare too openly. The dust in the air began to thin as they moved downward. The corridor sloped at an odd angle, as though the entire structure had settled over time. Eventually, they reached a chamber that must once have been some kind of loading dock or cargo hold. Broken crates were strewn about, and in the center stood a single generator that still hummed faintly with residual power. A couple of toppled stasis pods lined the walls, their glass fronts shattered. A flicker of movement drew Valen's eye. A small, scuttling shape disappeared into the darkness, probably a rodent-like creature. He tried not to think about what else might be lurking here. Amethea turned to him with a wary expression. We can rest here for a moment. I can't sense any immediate danger. He slid his pack off his shoulders and set it down, rolling his neck to ease some tension. Amethea walked a slow circle around the room, her attention lingering on the shattered pods. He saw a flicker of sadness cross her face. Were these your people? He asked quietly. She paused, then shook her head. No. At least, not that I know of. But this technology. She gestured at the pods. It belonged to the ones who came here years ago, possibly to study my planet's artifacts. Maybe they took something they shouldn't have. She crouched, running her fingertips over the broken glass, her glowing markings reflecting like neon across the surface. Artifacts, he repeated. You said you came for something that might help your kind. She stayed quiet for a few heartbeats, then stood and turned toward him. The flickering overhead light revealed the faint flush of color on her cheeks, or maybe that was just another effect of her glowing patterns. I don't know what it is exactly, but the legends speak of a device that once bound our minds together as a collective. Some called it a communion crystal. When our tribes were scattered by war, we lost that connection. Now we fight amongst ourselves. Her expression tightened. I believe it's here. Or at least, a piece of it. Valen watched her carefully. She seemed so certain, yet also desperate. Are you alone in looking for it? He asked gently. No support from your people? Her jaw clenched. I was exiled. He let out a soft breath. I'm sorry. She tilted her head, her crest shifting slightly. You are the first outsider to say such a thing. Most consider exile a weakness or a punishment well earned. But I only want to save them from themselves. Valen felt a pang of empathy. He knew what it was like to lose everything, to be forced to roam the galaxy with no real place to call home. Well, he said quietly, sometimes it takes an outsider to see solutions no one else can. If this artifact is here, I'll help you find it. She studied him again, her eyes narrowing as if testing his sincerity. Why? She asked. You gain nothing from this. He shrugged. I used to be a soldier. Then I was a pilot. Then a scavenger. I've seen enough conflict. If there's a chance to help someone find peace, even a stranger, that seems worthwhile. He offered a tentative smile. Also, I've always been too curious for my own good. An alien artifact that can connect minds? Hard to resist. Her expression softened. He still couldn't read her perfectly, but the tension in her posture eased. Very well, Valen. Then we will help each other. But be warned, it may get dangerous. He let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. I figured that from the moment you told me not to move back there. I'm prepared. She glanced around once more and then moved closer to him. He was keenly aware of her proximity, of how her luminescent patterns almost danced beneath the collar of her garment, across her collarbones. You have grit, she murmured. And that intrigues me. There was a rawness in her eyes when she said it, a hungry curiosity that sent a prickle of electricity up his spine. For a moment, neither of them moved. He wondered if she could sense his racing thoughts as easily as she'd felt his heartbeat. He swallowed, trying to keep his voice steady. I'll try not to disappoint. She smiled then, truly smiled, revealing the sharp points of her teeth. You won't, she said simply, and then she turned away, leaving him to grapple with the heady mix of relief and longing that had started to coil in his belly. They set up a makeshift rest area in a corner of the chamber. Valen checked his supplies, some rations, a coil of cable, a flashlight, and an old data scanner that might help them locate hidden compartments. Amathea watched him rummage through his pack, her gaze flicking occasionally to his hands. There was a curious tilt to her head, as though she was fascinated by the simplest motions he made. At one point, as he tested the flashlight, the beam caught her eyes and made them glisten like polished obsidian. She blinked quickly, turning her face away. He could have sworn she was blushing, though the color on her cheeks seemed to shift from a soft purple to a more vivid pink under the dancing luminescence. The directness of her gaze had his heart thrumming. Wordlessly, she took the cable from his hands at one point, fingertips brushing his knuckles. Then she lifted it to examine it, her lips pursing as if testing the strength. It's not as strong as the woven lines from my homeland, she remarked, handing it back carefully. Yet she didn't withdraw her hand entirely. Instead, she hesitated, letting her palm linger against his for a moment, curious. Valen stared at their hands, his rough callous skin in contact with her smooth, almost satiny texture. There were faint ridges along her fingers' scales, perhaps? The bioluminescent lines on her wrist flickered. Emboldened, he gently curled his fingertips around hers. She exhaled softly, that swirl of color dancing again up her arms. Then, in a gesture that startled him, she dipped her head and touched the tip of her tongue, soft, warm, against the back of his hand. It was more like a tasting than a kiss, a lightning moment that sent heat racing through his body. She drew back at once, as if she'd startled herself. Her eyes were wide, nearly black in the poor light, and her chest rose and fell with a sudden intake of breath. She began, but stopped, seeming unsure how to explain. He could see the flush in her face deepen. Despite his own surprise, he felt a surge of empathy. He reached for her hand again, this time more slowly. He brought his index finger up near her lips, a silent question. She stared at him, unblinking, her breath ragged. Then, in a trembling moment, she parted those lips and let her tongue flick out once more, a quick, warm pressure against his fingertip. He stood transfixed, watching the flush spread across her cheeks, down her neck, glowing with subtle shifts of light. A shaky exhale escaped him. That's nice," he said, voice hoarse with confusion and intrigue. He could feel his heart pounding, and he was sure she felt it too. They hovered in that intimate bubble for a few heartbeats, 1,000 questions flitting through his mind. Was this a greeting in her culture? Some form of bonding? Or was it a purely spontaneous curiosity? Before he could find the words to ask, a distant crash echoed through the corridor outside, jolting them both back to reality. He leaped to his feet, and she whipped around, her tail twitching in alarm, the lights on her body pulsing with renewed caution. "We're not alone," he muttered, grabbing for his sidearm. She nodded, posture coiled like a spring ready to snap. Together, they edged toward the chamber's entrance. The corridor beyond was still, but the air felt charged with the threat of something prowling. Amalthea inhaled deeply, her crest raising slightly. "There's more than one," she whispered, nodding down the corridor. "I sense at least 2 presences." Valen tightened his grip on the pistol. "Let's hope they're not hostile. But in places like this, it's rarely anything friendly." She gave him a grim look that confirmed she felt the same. They moved quietly, side by side, footsteps careful on the debris-littered floor. The corridor ended in a T-junction, one branch caved in and the other flickering with half-functional lights. Another sound, like metal scraping metal, drifted from that direction. Amalthea placed a hand lightly on Valen's shoulder, urging him to stay behind her. He opened his mouth to protest but realized she might be better at sensing threats. They crept forward, each breath echoing in his ears. Then, from around the corner, 2 shapes emerged. Humanoid, but their silhouettes were bulky and ragged, with patchwork armor strapped across their chests. One carried a rifle, the other a broad blade. Valen's gut churned. Slavers or scavengers, no doubt. Their eyes gleamed with that feral opportunism he'd seen countless times across the galaxy. The one with the rifle raised it at them, barking out something unintelligible in a guttural dialect. Instinct flared in Valen's muscles. He dove aside, pulling Amalthea down with him as a bolt of energy seared the air. She moved lively, rolling behind a half-collapsed console for cover. Before Valen could return fire, the other figure rushed forward, swinging the blade. Valen barely had time to block with the butt of his pistol. Sparks flew as metal scraped, and he felt the impact shudder through his arms. Amalthea sprang up in that moment, her body coiling with surprising strength. She lashed out with her tail, catching the attacker off balance. He stumbled, giving Valen an opening to fire a shot at the rifle-wielding one. The shot grazed the figure's shoulder, sending him staggering back. Amalthea hissed, her crest flaring, the bioluminescent lines on her arms glowing in pulses that seemed to match her rapid heartbeat. With fluid grace, she struck again, hooking her opponent's ankle and bringing him crashing to the ground. Valen took advantage of the chaos to charge the rifleman, who tried to raise his weapon again. They collided, and the rifle went skittering across the floor. Valen grunted as the figure slammed an armored forearm into his chest, nearly knocking him flat. But he managed to wrestle free, delivering a desperate punch to the slaver's face. The man, if it was a man, let out a guttural curse and staggered. Valen pressed the advantage, slamming him back into a broken panel, where the half-exposed wires sizzled. The slaver let out a strangled yell as the current coursed through him. Valen drew back, watching as the figure collapsed in a smoking heap. He whirled around just in time to see Amalthea wrestling with the other attacker. Despite her evident strength and agility, he was bigger, pinning her against the wall with brute force, knife raised. Valen didn't hesitate. He leveled his pistol and fired. A bright bolt cut through the air, striking the attacker in the flank. He roared in pain and released Amalthea. She slid free, tail whipping with lethal precision across his neck, causing him to jerk sideways. With a final, sickening thud, he crumpled to the ground. Panting, Valen rushed to her side, scanning for more threats. The corridor fell quiet except for the hum of broken lights and the faint crackle of electricity from the panel. "You okay?" he asked, breath ragged. She nodded, pressing a hand to her side. "They didn't cut me, I think." She looked from him to the slavers, face tense. "We should move before more come." He agreed, but first he took a moment to search the bodies. He felt no sympathy for these outlaws. Slavers never deserved mercy. He found some energy cells that fit his pistol and a small data stick that might contain location logs. Pocketing it, he glanced at Amathea, noticing her trembling. "They almost had me," she admitted quietly. "Almost," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "But you handled yourself well." Her eyes flickered up, glowing with that strange luminescence. She didn't answer, but the small furrow in her brow told him she was shaken. Without thinking too much, he pulled her into a quick embrace. She stiffened at first, as though unfamiliar with the gesture, but then her arms came around him, and she buried her face against his shoulder. Her tail curled around his calf in a half-conscious motion that made his pulse jolt. After a few seconds, they separated. She avoided his gaze, but he could feel the warmth radiating from her cheeks. "We should keep moving," she murmured. They continued down the corridor, more wary now. Twice more they heard movement, but it was distant enough that they managed to avoid any further confrontations. Eventually, the path sloped downward to a series of sealed doors. One of them still had power, indicated by a dimly flickering keypad. Amathea knelt beside it, running her slender fingers over the console's alien script. "This is Old Terran Standard, yes?" she asked softly. Valen peered over her shoulder. "Looks like it," he said, tapping the screen. "Let's see if we can bypass the security." He pulled out his data scanner, hooking it to the port. The device chirped as it tried to interface. "Might take a minute." Amathea watched in fascination as lines of code streamed across the scanner. "Your kind's technology is so direct," she mused, brushing a luminescent pattern on her wrist thoughtfully. "My people's systems rely more on organic interfacing." He arched a brow. "Organic interfacing?" She nodded. "We grow certain neurocrystals that respond to the user's own impulses. It's said the communion crystal was the greatest of these, a relic from our ancestors that allowed entire cities to share thoughts and emotions." Valen's gaze flicked to her, intrigued. "That's extraordinary. No wonder you're searching for it." She gave a soft hum of agreement, then hesitated. "You were a soldier. Have you ever seen a telepathic weapon?" He shook his head slowly. "I've heard rumors, but never come across anything confirmed. The galaxy is vast. There are always stories of lost technologies that can do the impossible. Usually they're just that, stories." Her lips quirked in a sad smile. "And yet here we are, chasing another story." He was about to respond when the scanner beeped a confirmation, and the door hissed, releasing a stale gust of pressurized air. "We're in," he said softly. Amathea rose to her feet, tension evident in the set of her shoulders. A faint ripple of her bioluminescence lit the darkness ahead. With a cautious nod, she stepped through the threshold, Valen close behind. Inside, the corridor curved sharply, leading to a wide chamber with rows of sealed crates. The temperature here was colder, and the air had a metallic tang. Lights embedded in the ceiling glowed an eerie bluish hue, casting strange shadows on the walls. Valen felt a tightening in his gut. This place had been sealed off for a reason. Amathea's luminous patterns grew brighter, as if mirroring her heightened emotions. "Something in here calls to me," she whispered, voice echoing in the quiet. "It's faint, but I can feel it." Valen nodded, scanning the area. Rows of containers lined up, each with a code stenciled on the side. He approached the nearest crate, searching for a control panel. "They might have locked everything down after the evacuation," he murmured. "Let's hope we can still override these locks." Amathea knelt by a crate, trailing her fingers across the labeling. "They used your language?" she noted, glancing up at him. "But some of these markings are unfamiliar, an older dialect, perhaps." He crouched next to her, brushing dust off the panel. "Let's see." He tapped a few keys, trying to coax life into the locking mechanism. After a moment, the crate clicked open with a whoosh of stale air. Inside were rows of small canisters, each bearing a white insignia. He picked one up, frowning at the label. Medicynth? Looks like some sort of regenerative compound. Old, though. Might be expired. She scanned the canister curiously, then set it aside, continuing down the row. They spent several minutes prying open various crates, discovering mostly mundane supplies, dried rations, basic medical equipment, old uniforms. Disappointment gnawed at Valen's chest, but Amethya's determination didn't waver. She kept moving deeper. Eventually, they reached a final crate in the far corner. Unlike the others, it was sealed tighter, and the panel was unresponsive. Amethya placed a palm flat against it, eyes closing as if she were listening for something. This is it, she said, a tremor in her voice. I can feel it. Inside. Valen nodded, hooking up his data scanner to the crate's external port. The device hummed, lines of code scrolling across its screen. It's heavily encrypted, he muttered, wiping sweat from his forehead. But let's see if we can talk it into unlocking. Amethya's gaze was intense, her tail flicking behind her in restless arcs. She hovered close to him, her warmth brushing against his side. He tried to focus on the data stream, but her presence was distracting, her scent, a faint floral spice, her slight movements as she leaned in. He forced himself to concentrate. After a few tense minutes, a series of beeps signaled partial success. I've got some of the layers bypassed, he announced, typing furiously on the scanner. Just a bit more. Suddenly, the panel flashed red, and a piercing alarm sounded. He cursed under his breath, tapping the scanner in frustration. It triggered a defense system. A hiss erupted from the walls as security turrets emerged. Valen grabbed Amethya and Dove behind a metal console, pulses of energy fire peppering the floor around them, sending sparks flying. She clung to him, heart pounding against his chest. We have to deactivate them, she shouted over the din. He peered around the edge of the console, spotting two automated turrets swiveling in their direction, each spitting out bright bolts of plasma. They're old models, he yelled back, checking his pistol. If I can get close enough, I might override them manually. She grimaced, biting her lip. We'll have to split them up. I can draw fire to one side, you take the other. He stared at her, concern twisting in his gut. That's dangerous. A rebellious flicker crossed her luminescent eyes. I can move fast, Valen. I won't get hit. She squeezed his arm reassuringly, her bravery stirring an odd mix of admiration and fear in him. Trust me. Before he could protest further, she sprang up and sprinted across the chamber, her lithe body weaving between crates. The nearest turret swiveled with mechanical precision, opening fire. She darted behind a cluster of containers, tail flicking around a corner as bright plasma scorched the air. Valen used the distraction to dash to the other side. He pressed his back to a wall, breathing hard. The whine of charging turrets filled the space. Carefully, he peeked around and saw the second turret scanning the area, muzzle glowing with stored energy. He took a breath, readied himself, then bolted forward, pistol raised. He fired a couple of shots at the turret's sensor array. Sparks erupted, but the turret kept moving, returning fire. He ducked behind a crate, the edges glowing red-hot where the turret's plasma clipped it. His heart hammered in his chest, adrenaline surging. Come on, he muttered, waiting for a lull in the blasts. Finally, the turret paused to recharge. He seized the moment, rushing forward and tackling the device from beneath. It was a compact, swiveling structure attached to a track in the ceiling. He jammed his pistol muzzle into a maintenance hatch and fired. The circuits inside exploded in a shower of sparks. The turret shuddered and fell limp, the glow fading from its muzzle. Panting, he looked around for Amethya. She'd gotten the other turret's attention, and it was blasting away at the crates near her. He shouted, waving his arms. Over here! The turret hesitated, then locked onto him. He dived, bracing himself behind a pillar as plasma fire rained around him. But the shift in focus gave Amethyst the opening she needed. She emerged behind the turret, climbed onto the stasis lock that anchored it, and smashed something with a swift kick of her heel. Sparks flew, and the device sputtered. She hopped down nimbly, breathing hard as it went dark. Silence fell, broken only by the crackling of spent energy. Valen let out a long breath, sagging against the wall. "You good?" he called. She nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. "I'm fine." He crossed the chamber in a few strides, meeting her in the center. She gave him a triumphant grin, chest rising and falling with the exertion. "Told you I could move fast," she teased, though her hands trembled slightly. He exhaled a shaky laugh, letting the tension unravel. "I won't doubt you again." His eyes flicked to the battered crate that had triggered all this. "I hope whatever's inside is worth it." She stared at the crate, a flicker of something close to reverence in her expression. "It has to be." With that, she knelt by the crate again, the panel now flickering with damage from the security meltdown. She pried open a side panel to reveal the manual release mechanism. Valen kneeled beside her, helping to unbolt it. With a final heave, the seal cracked open. Inside lay a small, translucent container about the size of a human head. Suspended in a viscous fluid was a crystal of shimmering violet, faintly pulsing with internal light. Amethyst's breath caught. Her hands hovered over it, as if afraid to touch something so sacred. The glow of her own bioluminescent pattern seemed to resonate with the crystal, flickering in tandem. She carefully lifted the container out, holding it in both hands like a precious egg. The glow inside the crystal intensified for a moment, sending shifting colors dancing across her face. Valen felt a wave of strange warmth pass over him, like a soft hum in his mind that vanished as quickly as it arrived. "This," she murmured, voice trembling with awe. "This is a fragment of the communion crystal. I can feel it." She glanced up at him, eyes shining with tears. "Thank you, Valen." Her voice was thick with emotion. "Thank you for helping me find it." He stared at the glowing crystal, a sense of wonder stirring in his chest. "So it's real, and you can use it to help your people?" She nodded, though her expression held a touch of uncertainty. "It's only a fragment, but it contains echoes of the collective memory. It might reignite the link among my scattered tribes if I can find a way to restore it." She cradled it gently. "I can't believe it's actually here." He found himself smiling, despite the ache of bruises from the firefight. "Then our mission's accomplished." She closed her eyes, relief and gratitude clear in every line of her posture. But when she opened them, a flicker of worry replaced her elation. "Not yet," she murmured. "We have to get it out of here, keep it safe from those who'd exploit it. And that will be the harder part." Valen nodded solemnly. "You're right. We should get moving. That alarm might have alerted more scavengers or turrets." She stood, still clutching the container close to her chest, and together they began making their way back through the corridor. As they passed the remains of the slavers, Amethyst's tail curled anxiously. "They came for salvage or for captives?" she said softly, eyes lingering on the fallen bodies. "Will they be the last?" He shook his head, a bitter set to his jaw. "Probably not. Places like this draw vultures." She grimaced and pressed closer to him as they moved on. With the crystal in her arms, she seemed more vulnerable, her earlier bravado tempered by the weight of responsibility. His protective instincts flared. He'd just met her, but he couldn't stand the thought of someone taking the artifact or hurting her. They made their way back toward the cargo hold where they'd taken shelter before, stopping only when a series of tremors shook the walls. Dust rained from the ceiling, and an ominous groan reverberated through the outpost structure. "The place is getting unstable," Valen muttered. "We might need another exit." Amethyst nodded, clutching the container protectively. "We'll find one." It took nearly half an hour of cautious backtracking and scanning with Valen's equipment to find a corridor that led to an alternate cargo lift. The door was half jammed, but he managed to pry it open enough for them to squeeze through. On the other side, they found a small elevator shaft. The lift itself was a rusted hulk at the bottom, but a ladder along the shaft's edge might give them a path up and out. Valen tested the rungs, grimacing at the rust flaking away under his grip. "We'll have to be careful," he murmured, glancing at Amethyst. She eyed the ladder, then the crystal container. It would be tricky to climb while holding it. She turned to him, lifting the container. "I trust you," she said quietly. "Please keep it safe." He hesitated, then carefully took it from her, cradling it against his chest. A ripple of unfamiliar energy tingled against his hands. It made his heart pound, like a strange sense of déjà vu flickering through his mind. He saw Amethyst's expression shift with concern, but he forced a reassuring smile. "I've got it." She nodded, then started up the ladder. He followed, crystal in one arm while climbing with the other. It wasn't the most secure method, but he managed, each step sending a metallic creak echoing up the shaft. Amethyst was graceful above him, her tail providing balance as she ascended. Occasionally, she glanced down to check on him, and each time he felt a small surge of warmth that had nothing to do with the environment. They reached the top, prying open another door. This level was in slightly better shape, the corridor lit by a series of flickering emergency lights. With luck, they'd find an exit route soon. But as they moved forward, voices echoed. More slavers. Valen cursed under his breath. Amethyst pressed herself against the wall, crest lowered. "Stay behind me," he whispered, easing the container into his pack for concealment. He peered around the corner, spotting a group of 3 rummaging through battered lockers. They were heavily armed and conversing in low, guttural tones. Likely more of the same crew. Amethyst tapped his shoulder lightly. "We can't fight all 3 at once without risking the crystal." He nodded. "We'll try to slip by. If that doesn't work, we'll have to cause a distraction." They crept along a side passage, hearts hammering in unison. Adrenaline shimmered through Valen's veins, heightening his awareness of every sound, every flicker of light on the walls. He could hear Amethyst's rapid breathing, feel the tension in her body whenever they brushed against each other. For a brief moment, he thought they'd make it past unnoticed. But then a stray piece of debris underfoot decided otherwise. The clatter of a falling pipe echoed loudly. One of the slavers barked an alert, and footsteps pounded toward them. Valen grabbed Amethyst's hand and ran. Plasma shots whizzed by, scorching walls and floor. They ducked into a side corridor, weaving among crates and overturned furniture. One shot came so close it singed a lock of hair from his temple, filling his nostrils with the acrid scent of burnt carbon. He growled, returning fire blindly behind him, hoping to slow their pursuers. Up ahead was a door with an emergency exit symbol. They bolted for it, slamming through. Inside was a large chamber with a grated floor and a wide shutter overhead, likely a hangar or cargo bay meant for loading supplies or small ships. Dusty equipment lay scattered, and overhead was a jammed exterior door that might once have opened to the planet's toxic atmosphere. A row of levers on the wall glowed faintly. "That must be the manual release," Valen said, pointing. "If we can power it, maybe we can get outside." Amethyst nodded, breath coming in quick gasps. "Do it. I'll hold them off." He hesitated. "We can't lose you. Are you sure?" She fixed him with a fierce stare. "You have the crystal. You must get it out if something happens to me. Go." She didn't wait for a response, charging to the chamber entrance and bracing herself behind a stack of crates. Valen felt a pang of fear for her but forced himself to focus. He ran to the levers, scanning them for an indication of which might power the door. He found a faded label for exhaust port override, and guessed that might do it. Gritting his teeth, he pushed one lever up. Sparks flew, and a dull hum vibrated through the floor. The overhead shutter groaned, rising a foot before stopping. Blaster fire erupted, and he heard Amethyst's hiss. He glanced back. She ducked behind the crate as a bolt splintered wood, returning fire with a smaller sidearm she'd taken from a fallen slaver earlier. Even outnumbered, she was relentless. One shot hit a slaver squarely in the chest, sending him sprawling. The others scattered for cover. Valen turned back to the control panel, pulling another lever. The hum intensified, and the door rose another few feet, letting in a swirl of hot, stale air. The planet outside was a desolate, storm-swept waste, tinted orange by the dust storms that raged across the horizon. Not exactly a friendly environment, but better than facing certain death trapped here. He shouted to Amethyst. "We have a partial opening. Let's get out!" She fired one more volley, then sprinted toward him. A bolt sizzled by her arm, grazing her. She stumbled with a cry, but continued running, clutching her scorched shoulder. Valen rushed forward, catching her before she fell. The overhead door was now raised enough for them to slip under. The slavers cursed, unleashing a barrage of shots that rattled off the metal walls. Valen helped Amethyst through the gap first, then ducked under himself. A final shot carved a glowing line across his thigh, burning through cloth and searing flesh. He clenched his teeth against the pain, dragging himself outside into the swirling dust storm. With a hiss, the door behind them slammed shut, an automatic override sealing it from the outside. They were trapped in the storm now, but at least the slavers couldn't follow easily. Amethyst pressed a hand to her wound, her face contorted in pain. Her luminescent patterns flickered erratically, like a short-circuiting circuit board. Valen felt the sting of his own burn. The dust storm whipped around them, grit stinging his eyes and cheeks. He quickly pulled out a small respirator mask from his pack and handed it to her. She fumbled with it, unfamiliar with the design, but he helped her secure it over her mouth and nose. Then he clamped his own over his face. They stumbled across the barren landscape, the outpost structure behind them barely visible through the howling wind. The sky was dark with dust, an orange haze of swirling grit. Each step felt like trudging through an endless desert. He had no idea where they were going, only that they needed to put distance between themselves and the slavers. After what felt like an eternity, they found partial shelter in the lee of a massive boulder outcrop. The wind still howled, but it was marginally calmer here. They collapsed to the ground, panting. Amethyst's shoulder was bleeding from the plasma burn, and Valen's thigh throbbed. He rummaged in his pack, carefully shifting the container, holding the crystal aside to reach his medkit. "Let me see your arm," he said gently, guiding her around so he could inspect the wound. The fabric she wore was scorched, revealing a patch of pale blue skin that was now blistered and raw. She winced as he applied a disinfectant. Her crest drooped, and her luminescent lines flickered with pain. "Thank you," she breathed, voice muffled by the respirator. "For staying with me." He managed a small smile. "We're in this together." He wrapped a bandage around her arm, then turned to his own injury, hissing at the burn on his thigh. She reached out, brushing his hand away to help him. Her touch was gentle, and her eyes glowed with tenderness despite the storm raging around them. As she cleaned his wound, her fingers lingered on his skin. In the gloom of the storm, her bioluminescence stood out vividly, painting her cheeks with shifting color. A surge of gratitude and raw attraction stirred in his chest. They were battered, barely escaping death, yet in that moment, their connection felt deeper than any fleeting alliance. She finished wrapping the bandage, exhaling shakily. Their eyes locked. He felt an urgent need to close the distance between them. Gently, he lifted a hand to the side of her face, tracing the curve of her jaw. She let out a ragged breath, leaning into his palm. Through the respirator, her voice trembled. "Valen." He hesitated, then tugged the mask aside just enough to expose his lips. She did the same, removing hers entirely. The dust stung, but he was too lost in her nearness to care. He lowered his head, and their lips met in a desperate, clumsy kiss, dust swirling around them. Her mouth was warm and soft, flavored by the faint tang of the alien atmosphere. She whimpered against him, arms sliding around his neck, pulling him closer. A wave of heat flooded him, sharper and more intense than any rush of adrenaline. They broke apart, coughing as the dust tore at their lungs. She quickly replaced her mask. He did the same, blinking fiercely. His heart pounded. We should find real shelter," he gasped, voice rasping through the mask. She nodded, eyes shining with more than just pain. "Yes, but not out here." They consulted the battered scanner. A blinking icon indicated there might be a structure or cave half a kilometer away. Gathering what remained of their strength, they pressed on. The storm raged, but step by step, they neared the coordinates. At last, they reached a jagged outcropping of rock that split to reveal the entrance of a narrow cave. It was dark, foreboding, but better than the storm. Inside, the air was stale but calm. They ventured deeper until the roaring wind outside became a distant howl. With a shaky exhale, they collapsed onto the cave floor, removing their masks. Valen set his pack down, gently cradling the crystal container. For a long moment, they just breathed, recovering from the ordeal. Finally, Amethea nodded at the crystal. "We need to shield it better. The dust could damage the casing." He rummaged for spare cloth, wrapping it carefully. "Done." He then turned to her, swallowing hard. He could still taste the memory of her kiss behind the dryness in his mouth. She regarded him with a similarly conflicted expression, her eyes bright in the dim light. "You saved my life," she said softly. "Again." He shook his head. "You saved mine. We're even." She let out a shaky laugh, a sound that made the cave feel a little less grim. "Perhaps we should just keep each other alive. It's more efficient." He smiled, and the tension bled away for a moment. But the ache in his leg reminded him their troubles were far from over. "We'll rest here," he said, checking the power levels on his scanner. "Once the storm dies down, we'll find a route off this planet. My ship is a wreck, though, so we might need to fix it or find another way." Amethea nodded, hand drifting to the bandage on her arm. "I can help with repairs. My people's technology is different, but I understand the basics." He gave her a look of relief. "That would be appreciated. The old bird's probably half buried in the dust by now." Silence settled. The only sound was their breathing and the faint keening of the wind outside. Eventually, Amethea scooted closer, her tail wrapping around her ankles. She rested a hand on his uninjured thigh, eyes searching his face. "Valen, earlier, when I touched your finger with my tongue..." She trailed off, color creeping into her cheeks. His heart fluttered. "Ah, yeah, that was surprising. Pleasant, but surprising." She exhaled, looking away. "It's a gesture of curiosity. An intimacy. To taste another's essence is a deep action in my culture. I hope I didn't offend." He placed his hand over hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "Offend? No. You just caught me off guard. I liked it." Her gaze lifted, relief shining in her eyes. "I can still taste your skin," she murmured shyly, the luminous patterns on her cheeks shifting with her blush. That simple admission made warmth coil low in his belly. Carefully, mindful of her wound, he moved closer. He lifted her uninjured arm, pressing a light kiss to the inside of her wrist. She trembled, inhaling sharply. "You taste like starlight," he whispered, the words tumbling out before he could question their poetry. She let out a soft laugh, eyes fluttering shut. She leaned in, and their mouths found each other again, slower this time. Dust and blood and exhaustion clung to them both, but the kiss was a fragile oasis of tenderness in a life full of violence. Her lips parted, and he felt the tip of her tongue brush his own, a tantalizing warmth that made him crave more despite the aches in his body. He found himself cupping the back of her head, fingers tangling in the crest. It was delicate but sturdy, and she made a small, encouraging sound at his touch. When they broke apart, she rested her forehead against his. "We should be careful. My people's ways of bonding can be intense." He ran his thumb along her lower lip, breath ragged. "I'm not afraid of intensity." Her eyes burned with emotion, a swirl of gratitude and longing. "Neither am I," she whispered. They fell into a silence thick with unspoken possibility. Eventually, reality intruded, and they shifted to tend their wounds more carefully. Amethea helped him apply a salve from her own supply, some organic gel that tingled in his burn. He returned the favor, gingerly rewrapping her arm. Each touch felt intimate, charged with undercurrents of simmering desire. As they settled in for a makeshift rest, he found himself holding her against him, seeking warmth and comfort in her alien embrace. She tucked her head beneath his chin, her crest brushing his skin. Her tail curled over his leg, a gentle weight that felt reassuring. He draped a folded blanket around them, mindful of the swirling dust that occasionally drifted in from the cave entrance. Outside, the storm continued to rage, a constant reminder of the harsh world they were in. In the darkness, guided only by the faint glow of her luminescent stripes, he felt the slow, steady rhythm of her heartbeat against his chest. With the crystals secured beside them, and the memory of their shared kiss lingering on his lips, a quiet sense of unity settled into his bones. In a galaxy full of danger and isolation, this moment of connection felt profound, even if it was born in adversity. He didn't know what would happen next, whether they'd even survive the next day. But as she drifted off against him, his arm around her waist, he allowed himself to hope. If a battered soldier and an exiled alien could find a spark of solace in each other, maybe there was a chance for something beyond survival. Maybe there was a chance for real belonging. By morning, or what passed for morning on this storm-racked planet, the wind had died to a manageable level, and dim light filtered into the cave. Valen opened his eyes to find Amethea still curled beside him, her breathing slow and even. He took a moment to study her face in the half-light. The high sweep of her crest, the bioluminescent lines that wound over her cheekbones, now a faint glow, subdued in rest. With a tentative finger, he traced the edge of her crest. She stirred, lids fluttering open. A soft smile touched her lips, and for a second, she looked vulnerable in a way that tugged at his chest. "You're awake," she murmured, voice husky with sleep. He nodded. "Couldn't sleep much, but I'm glad you could." He paused, clearing his throat. "Arm still hurt?" She flexed it gently. "It's healing. Your salve worked well." He returned her smile, then reluctantly sat up. "We should figure out our next move. My ship isn't far from the outpost. If we can get it running, we might be able to leave this world and find a safer place to restore your crystal." She nodded, also sitting up. The dust in her hair reflected the pale light, but she didn't seem to mind. "I want to see your ship," she said. "Maybe the communion fragment can guide us, or at least keep it safe from more scavengers." She paused. "Will you help me find a proper place to reconnect it with my people?" He looked into her wide eyes, seeing the flicker of fear and hope. "Yes," he said simply. "We'll do this together." They emerged from the cave to a landscape of rocky ridges and swirling dust devils that danced across the red-orange ground. The air was thick, but manageable with masks. Setting a steady pace, they trudged toward the coordinates Valen had stored for his ship's location. They moved in silence, occasionally exchanging glances that spoke volumes more than words. The trek took hours. Each step aggravated his thigh wound, and Amethea's shoulder occasionally bled through the bandage. Still, they pressed on. Finally, they spotted the silhouette of a battered craft half buried in a dune of reddish sand. The hull was scorched, and one of the landing struts had collapsed, but it was their best hope. "Home sweet home," Valen muttered, voice muffled by the mask. He waded through the sand toward the hatch, grimacing at the stuck mechanism. Amethea helped him force it open with a metallic squeal. Inside was cramped and smelled of stale air, but at least it was sheltered. He guided her through the narrow passages, showing her the cockpit, a two-seat arrangement with an outdated control panel. Panels flickered with dying battery power. "I had to land abruptly," he explained. "Storm messed with my engines. The fuel cells might be shot." Amethea surveyed the interior, her tail swishing thoughtfully. "I can try something," she murmured. "My people use certain crystals to regulate energy flow. Perhaps it can stabilize your cells." He nodded, relief flooding him. "That would be amazing. Let me show you the engineering access." They spent the better part of the day dismantling panels, salvaging parts, and attempting to coax life back into the ship's battered systems. Amethea produced a small shard from her pack, an organic crystal from her homeland that glowed faintly whenever she handled it. She carefully integrated it with the ship's power relays, humming a strange tune under her breath as she worked. Occasionally, she'd ask Valen to hold wires or pass her a tool, and each time their hands brushed, they exchanged a brief, heated glance. At one point, While adjusting a power conduit near the bunk area, Valen accidentally grazed her waist, just under the edge of her garments. She hissed softly, arching into his touch. Their eyes met, and the moment stretched. Dust-smeared, exhausted, they still felt that electric pull between them. He couldn't help himself, leaning in to kiss her. She melted against him, the hum of the ship's power mixing with the rush of blood in his ears. The taste of her lips, the feel of her body pressed close, he forgot the harshness of the world outside. "We have to finish repairs," she finally gasped, though her hands clutched his jacket as if reluctant to let go. He nodded, pressing his forehead to hers. "Right. Repairs first, then." He trailed off, a soft grin crossing his face. She smiled back, her crest flickering with an almost playful energy. "Then we see how well this ship can hold us." His blood warmed at her implication, but they returned to work. Bit by bit, they made progress. The engines coughed and sputtered to life once, nearly shorting out, but Amethia's crystal shard stabilized the feedback, and a flicker of hope ignited in Valen's chest. If they could just get enough thrust to break orbit. As dusk approached, they paused to eat some of the rations. Amethia wrinkled her nose at the bland taste, but consumed them gratefully. Valen tested the water purifier, relieved to find it still functional. They shared the filtered water from a single cup, trading sips in an oddly intimate ritual. Eventually, they turned their attention to the navigation console. He punched in a few commands, and the console flickered, showing a partial star map. They were near the edges of the known sector. The nearest inhabited station was days away. "If we can get her into orbit, we might jump to the station for repairs," Valen said. "Assuming the faster-than-light drive is intact." Amethia nodded. "And from there, we can find a path to my home, or at least to a place where I can safely begin the process of reconnecting with them. I'll need time to study the fragment." She shot him a glance. "Will you come with me?" He paused, a tightness in his chest. The truth was, he had nowhere else. He'd been drifting aimlessly for years. He looked into her luminescent eyes, remembering how her mouth felt on his, how her presence made him feel alive. "Yes," he said quietly. "If you'll have me, I want to be there." She reached across the console, clasping his hand. "I do," she whispered, voice thick with emotion. "Truly." They fell into a contemplative silence, the soft beeping of the console filling the air. Finally, he stood and offered her his hand. "We should rest," he said, inclining his head toward the small bunk at the rear of the ship. "Tomorrow, if the winds hold, we'll try liftoff." Her cheeks flushed a faint violet, but she took his hand. "Rest," she echoed, a note of breathy humor in her voice. "Yes." In the cramped bunk, they lay side by side, awkward at first in the confined space. But soon, their warmth drew them together, limbs tangling. Their injuries still ached, but the presence of each other's body was a balm against the loneliness of the galaxy. Slowly, gently, they explored one another, her fingers tracing the scars on his chest, his lips brushing the soft glow of her throat. Each touch felt like a quiet revelation. She pressed close, breath catching as his hands slid under the edge of her garment, caressing the smooth plane of her stomach. Her tail curled around his leg, her luminescent lines pulsing in time with her quickening pulse. He paused, searching her face. "Are you sure?" he whispered, not wanting to overstep. Her eyes burned with a raw need, but also a tenderness that made his heart stutter. "Yes," she breathed. "I've never been more sure." They met in a wave of kisses that started slow and deepened into something urgent, stifling the small moans and gasps that escaped. He let his hands roam, learning the curves and ridges of her alien form. She responded with trembling eagerness, her own touches exploring the planes of his body. Time blurred, the swirl of sensations heightening his awareness of her every reaction. Her crest quivered under his fingertips, her nails digging lightly into his back. When her lips traveled down his neck, a shiver of intense pleasure coursed through him. Their hearts pounded together, a frantic rhythm in the hush of the bunk. At some point, the reality of the cramped space forced them to shift. She half laughed, half gasped, whispering something about the narrow bunk. He chuckled softly in return, pressing an apologetic kiss to her temple. But neither of them stopped. They adjusted, limbs tangling in new configurations. The closeness only seemed to heighten the intimacy, like they were in their own secret world, floating in darkness with only each other's breath and warmth for guidance. Her tail coiled around his thigh, pulling him closer. He felt the electric slide of her scales against his skin. A wave of desire made him groan softly. She pressed her forehead to his, exhaling his name in a trembling whisper. The luminous patterns across her body danced with mesmerizing shifts, reflecting the ebb and flow of her arousal. He murmured her name in return, voice thick with emotion. Amathea! In that utterance, he tried to convey everything he couldn't put into words: gratitude, longing, tenderness. He never expected to feel anything like this again, not after the heartbreak that had hardened him over the years. Yet here she was, an alien from a distant culture, and in her touch he found a spark he thought he'd lost forever. The final barriers between them fell away as they pressed together, flesh against flesh in a careful, building wave of sensation. Their bodies found a rhythm, a dance of breathless discovery. Gasps blended into hushed cries, their closeness forging a bond deeper than mere circumstance. As they reached the peak of that shared moment, a silent understanding flowed between them, a spark of connection that transcended words. Afterward, they lay entwined, chests heaving, skins slick with sweat that glimmered in her faint light. The hush of the ship settled back around them, and he could hear both their hearts beating in tandem. Amathea stroked the side of his face, her own features soft with wonder. "I feel like your essence and mine are merging," she whispered, her eyes half-lidded. "Like a mental bond." He pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, still catching his breath. I feel it too," he admitted. There was a strange warmth in his mind, a sense of closeness that went beyond the physical. He wondered if it was a side effect of her species' natural telepathic abilities, or just the raw power of intimacy after facing danger together. They drifted into a hazy half-sleep, wrapped in each other's arms. For the first time in a long while, Valen felt safe. He pressed his cheek to the top of her head, lulled by the hum of the ship's systems and the rhythmic rise and fall of her breath. Night passed in fitful dreams of swirling lights and half-formed alien landscapes that lingered at the edges of his consciousness. When he woke, the bunk was cold and empty. He startled, sitting up, only to find Amathea at the cockpit console, checking the readouts. She glanced back at him, her features softening in a smile. "Hey," she said. "Didn't want to wake you, but we might have enough power to try liftoff." He swung his legs over, wincing at a stab of pain in his thigh. The bandage there was darkened, but he could still move. He pulled on his pants and boots, limping to her side. "Ready when you are." They ran through the pre-flight checks. The engines coughed again, but after a few tense moments, they rumbled to life. Amathea's crystal integration had stabilized the power flow. Valen guided the craft out of the sand with shaking arms, the thrusters straining. But eventually, the ship rose above the dunes, swirling dust parted by the roar of engines. He felt a surge of triumph as they broke free of the planet's gravity well, the orange storm clouds diminishing into a swirl below them. Amathea's eyes sparkled with relief, her crest rising. "We made it," she breathed. He punched in coordinates for a distant station known for not asking too many questions, handing her a headset. "We'll have to limp there on sublight for a bit, then see if we can manage a jump. The FTL drive is tricky, but I'll give it my best." Amathea nodded, determination radiating from her. "I'm with you." They soared through the darkness, leaving the wasteland planet behind. The hum of the engines lulled them, and fatigue from the constant adrenaline crashes weighed on their shoulders. But the presence of the communion crystal seemed almost comforting, as if it pulsed with promise. Occasionally, Valen thought he sensed a subtle hum in his thoughts, like the distant echo of countless voices. When he glanced at Amathea, her expression told him she felt something similar. She didn't let go of his hand for long, even as she helped monitor systems or adjusted the improvised crystal regulator. Every so often, she'd steal a glance at him, a soft smile curving her lips. In turn, he found himself rubbing the small patch of scales at her wrist or brushing his fingers over her crest whenever they paused. That gentle contact grounded them, as though reassuring both that this was real, not some delirious dream. After hours of careful maneuvering, they managed to engage the jump drive with a flicker of wormhole distortion. The ship lurched, struggling, but held together. The jump was short, depositing them near a battered refueling outpost orbiting a gas giant. The outpost was little more than a series of modular rings, each dedicated to different services: repairs, resupply, medical. Perfect for their needs, if they had anything left to barter. Valen guided the ship into a docking clamp, powering down the engines with a shudder that made the whole craft groan. Once stable, they moved to the airlock. He slung the pack with the crystal carefully over his shoulder, and Amethea joined him, tail flicking nervously. "We'll have to keep it hidden," she said quietly. "There are those who would pay fortunes for even a rumor of such relics." He nodded grimly. "We'll find a private bay or a secure locker." The station's corridors were dimly lit, the walls plastered with adverts for salvage goods and questionable entertainment. A few bored dock workers threw them curious looks. Valen wore a battered jacket to conceal his pistol, Amethea donned a hooded cloak to hide her crest. They navigated the maze of narrow walkways until they found a small repair bay run by a grizzled mechanic who didn't bother to ask too many questions. Negotiations were tense, but Valen had a stash of credits left over from previous scavenging, and the mechanic agreed to take a look at the ship's engines. In the meantime, they rented a private bunk room a few decks over, no luxury suite, but safer than sleeping in the ship's corridor. Inside the cramped quarters, the hum of station life vibrated through the walls. A flickering ceiling light gave everything a worn, yellowish cast. Amethea set the pack down, exhaling. "I don't like being around so many strangers," she admitted, crossing her arms. "It's overwhelming. The scents, the sounds." Valen placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "I know. I've been to worse stations, though. At least here, nobody's tried to shoot us yet." She gave a small, rueful laugh. "A low bar, but I'll take it." He moved closer, brushing a thumb over her cheek. "As soon as the ship's fixed, we'll head toward your homeworld or wherever you need to go to restore the crystal." Her gaze dropped to the pack that housed the relic. "I'm not sure my people will welcome me, but with the communion crystal, I might be able to show them a better path, a unification." She swallowed hard. "I'm scared, Valen. If they reject it, or me, it could mean war continues. And if certain factions learn you helped me, they could target you too." He gently tilted her chin up, meeting her gaze. "I'm not going anywhere," he said firmly. "No matter what happens, we face it together. I won't abandon you." Her eyes shone, and she brought her hands up to cradle his face. I didn't think I could trust anyone this deeply again." She kissed him then, slow and tender, a sigh escaping between their lips. Despite the dangers surrounding them, that moment felt pure, a fragile promise of hope. Hours passed while they waited for news of the ship's repairs. They rationed out what meager credits they had left, grabbing a quick meal from a dingy food stall. Amethea kept her hood raised, and though she garnered a few questioning glances, no one seemed keen to confront her. In the station's chaotic swirl of species, one more cloaked figure wasn't remarkable enough to stir trouble on its own. Eventually, they returned to their quarters. Amethea sat cross-legged on the bunk, carefully removing the communion fragment from its container. The violet crystal shimmered, sending dancing reflections across the walls. She closed her eyes, placing both hands gently on it, as though trying to connect with whatever faint echoes might reside within. Valen watched quietly, sensing the tension in her posture, the trembling in her fingertips. She breathed in measured cycles, crest slowly rising. Then her eyes snapped open, and she drew a sharp breath. "I felt something," she whispered. "A presence, faint but yearning. It's almost like the crystal is trying to reach out, searching for minds to bind with." Valen approached, laying a tentative hand on her shoulder. "Could it be sensing your people, even from here?" She shook her head. "Too far, I think. But it might be sensing you." Her eyes flicked to his. And me. Our emotions, our bond. This might sound strange, but do you feel a slight hum in your chest? A warmth that isn't just physical? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. I've felt something ever since we found that fragment, like a soft buzzing at the edge of my thoughts. She exhaled. Then it's already connecting to us, at least in some limited way. If we can get it to my homeworld, near the ancient shrines where the original crystal once stood, it might fully activate. But the process, it could be overwhelming. He crouched beside her, gently resting a hand on the crystal's smooth surface. It felt warm, almost alive. I'm willing to take the risk. If it means helping you, helping your people, I'll do it. Her gaze softened. You say that so easily, but you barely know me. My people might see you as an invader or worse. He shrugged, mustering a weary smile. I know enough, that you're brave and determined, and you care enough to risk exile for their sake. That's worth fighting for. She clasped his hand tightly, the crystal's glow reflecting in her eyes. Thank you, she whispered, voice trembling with gratitude and something deeper, something that settled in the space between their joined fingers. A chime at the door interrupted them. A muffled voice announced it was the mechanic's assistant. They exchanged a quick glance before Valen secured the crystal back in its container and tucked it out of sight. Amethea threw on her hood again, retreating to a corner. Valen opened the door to a squat alien with thick, leathery skin and an oily mechanic's jumpsuit. The creature thrust a greasy data pad at him. Ship's battered, but we can patch it. Price has gone up though, extra parts needed. Boss says double the earlier quote. Valen's jaw clenched. That's not what we agreed. The assistant shrugged, unperturbed. It's the final price, take it or leave it. We got other clients waiting. Valen swore under his breath. We don't have that many credits. The assistant's beady eyes flicked behind him, where Amethea stood half in shadow. A sly grin spread across the alien's face. You got something to barter? Precious cargo, maybe? A spike of anger and protectiveness flared in Valen. She's not cargo. And we have nothing else. The assistant shrugged again, turning to leave. Then good luck. That ship's staying grounded. Valen slammed a hand on the door frame. Wait, maybe we can work something out. A job or something to pay off the difference. The assistant paused. Boss might have a job. Hazard pay. We get a cut, we fix your ship. Valen exchanged a look with Amethea, who stepped forward, crest visible under the hood. What job? She asked tersely. The assistant's eyes widened at the glimpse of her features, but it covered its reaction with a smirk. Some old tunnel deep in the station's underbelly. Strange readings. The boss wants to see if there's salvage or a lost cargo stash. But everyone he sends disappears. So if you go down there, find the stash, whatever it is, and bring it back, maybe you can keep a cut that covers the repairs. Amethea's expression turned wary, but she nodded slowly. It might be our only choice, she murmured to Valen. Valen pinched the bridge of his nose, frustration warring with necessity. Fine. We'll do it. If it covers the cost, we have a deal. The assistant grinned, pushing the data pad at him. Sign here. Boss'll send details. Good luck, you'll need it. The alien shuffled off, leaving them in tense silence. Amethea sat on the edge of the bunk, brow furrowed. Another cryptic mission? Feels like we just escaped one nightmare. He sighed. I know. But without the credits, we're stranded here. And who knows how many more scavengers might learn about the crystal if we linger. She ran a hand over her face, the faint glow of her markings betraying her anxiety. Then we go into the underbelly together. Valen forced a grin. Guess we're not done with danger yet. That night, they lay awake in the cramped bunk, either able to truly rest. She curled against him, but the tension in her muscles told him she was on edge. Gently he stroked her crest, trying to calm her. Despite the looming risk, a sense of closeness wove between them that felt deeper each time they touched. They were forging trust in the crucible of constant threats, and it bound them tighter than simple words ever could. Eventually, she sighed, pressing her lips to his collarbone. I want to believe in something brighter after all this, she whispered. I want to believe we're fighting for more than just survival. He slid his hand along her arm, feeling the faint ridges of her scales. We are, he murmured. We're fighting for a future that's ours, not just forced on us. Her breath caught in her throat, and she shifted, sliding onto his lap. Even in the dim station lights, he could see the hunger in her eyes, an emotional hunger as much as physical. Slowly, her hands slipped under his shirt, caressing his stomach. He hissed softly at the contact, desire coiling hot in his veins. They kissed again, a silent vow to find peace in each other's arms despite the turmoil. Clothes slipped away, and the tension in her body melted into an urgency that matched his own. This time, there was a quiet desperation to the way she held him, a need for closeness that could banish the fear of tomorrow. Their moans were hushed by each other's mouths, her tail curling around his waist. The bunk squeaked under their movements, but neither cared. Each kiss spoke of yearning, each touch a reminder of how precious and precarious their bond was. He let his lips wander along her throat, following the luminescent trails that pulsed with her rising heartbeat. She cried out softly, nails digging into his back. The swirl of alien heat enveloped them both. When they finally collapsed in a tangle of limbs, sweat beading on their brows, she tucked her head under his chin, her breathing still unsteady. He wrapped his arms around her, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her crest. Neither spoke, but the moment held an unspoken promise. They were in this together, no matter what came next. In the morning, they armed themselves with what little gear they had and made their way to the station's underbelly. A set of service tunnels led to a neglected sector where flickering lights and rusted metal told the story of decades of decay. The air smelled of old coolant and stale water. Strange symbols marred the walls, possibly left by squatters or a defunct cult. They followed the coordinates the mechanic had sent, stepping over broken pipes and kicking aside debris. It felt eerily reminiscent of the derelict outpost where they'd first met, except now they were in an enclosed station environment. If something went wrong, the vacuum of space lurked just behind these walls. Their path ended at a heavy door with manual locks. Valen pried at it, and Amathea joined him, their combined strength forcing it open. Beyond was a shaft descending into darkness. A ladder led down, corroded and uninviting. He peered over the edge, shining a flashlight. Looks deep. If the stash is here, it's well hidden. She nodded, swallowing. Let's go. They climbed down, rung by rung, the echo of their breath reverberating. Suddenly, the ladder shook as a rung gave way beneath Amathea's foot. She slipped with a yelp, arms flailing. Valen lunged, grabbing her wrist. His own grip on the ladder threatened to fail, the metal groaning. Heart pounding, he managed to haul her back up. Her eyes were wide, chest heaving. Thank you, she stammered. He pressed a shaky kiss to her temple. Always. They carefully resumed their descent until they reached a small platform. The corridor ahead was cramped, half flooded with murky water. As they splashed forward, shapes scurried in the darkness, pest-like creatures or something worse. Neither spoke, focusing on pushing onward. Finally, the corridor opened into a large chamber lit by sporadic flickers from malfunctioning overhead lights. In the center, a massive, sealed cargo container loomed, surrounded by collapsed shelving. Valen and Amathea exchanged a wary glance. This had to be what the mechanic wanted. But if previous crews had disappeared, there was surely a reason. They approached cautiously. The container's digital readout was dead, but a secondary panel glowed faintly. Amathea traced her fingers over the controls, a deep frown lining her brow. This container is locked from the inside. That's unusual. Valen's gut churned. Or from somewhere remote. Let me see if I can bypass it. He wired his data scanner in, the device beeping uncertainly. Lines of code scrolled by. This is old biotech coding, he muttered. Hybrid of organic and synthetic. I haven't seen anything quite like it. Amathea's eyes narrowed. Could it be related to my people's technology? He shook his head, uncertain. Possibly. It's definitely beyond standard station tech. After a few attempts, the container seal hissed, releasing a puff of stale air. Valen raised his weapon, stepping back, heart pounding. Amethyst tensed beside him, tail lashing. The container cracked open, revealing a mass of tangled cables and organic vines. A hum of energy pulsed within. Suddenly, a shape stirred among the vines, a humanoid figure, wires and fleshy growth melding with metal plating. The figure let out a ragged breath, eyes snapping open to reveal a pale blue glow. It lurched forward as if awakening from a nightmare. Valen's mind reeled. "What the hell is that?" he whispered. A twisted, modulated voice emerged from the figure's lips. "Who unsealed the pod?" Its gaze flickered over them, cold and calculating. "I am designated Calyx. My creators, they abandoned me." Amethyst inhaled sharply. "A living biotech experiment?" The figure nodded or attempted to. "Yes and no. I hold knowledge. They wanted to harness me." Valen raised his pistol, unsure if this being was a threat. "We're not here for you. We were sent for salvage. No one said anything about a living subject." Calyx's eyes narrowed. "They wanted me. They want my data. But I sense something else within you." He turned his gaze to Amethyst, to the faint glow of the communion crystal in her pack. "A powerful relic. I can feel it. You must relinquish it." A wave of cold dread passed over Valen. "Not a chance," he growled. Calyx's mechanical limbs twitched, detaching from the vines. "I was programmed to retrieve such artifacts from my creators. Hand it over." Amethyst stepped back, refusing. Calyx lunged with shocking speed, an arm sprouting metallic tendrils that lashed out. She cried out, stumbling. Valen fired a shot, but Calyx moved unnaturally fast, batting the bolt aside with a spark of energy. Fear and fury surged through Valen. He advanced, firing repeatedly, but Calyx deflected most shots, only staggering once. The half-flooded floor splashed as the combatants struggled. Amethyst regained her balance and unleashed a fierce hiss, launching herself at the cyborg. Her tail whipped out, striking with lethal grace, but Calyx's armor-like plating absorbed most of the impact. A cry tore from Valen's throat as Calyx slammed him into a metal beam, ripping the gun from his hand. White-hot pain lanced through his ribs. The figure turned back to Amethyst, mechanical tendrils snaking toward her pack. She snarled, clinging to the strap desperately. In a desperate move, Valen lunged, grabbing a sparking cable from the container's open wiring. He thrust it at Calyx's exposed back. Electricity surged, crackling across biotech flesh. Calyx let out a guttural shriek, convulsing. Seizing the opportunity, Amethyst tore free, spinning to deliver a solid kick to the cyborg's chest. The combined forces sent Calyx toppling backward into the flooded water. Sparks erupted around him, arcs of energy dancing. Calyx's eyes went wide, locked on Amethyst. "The relic must be collected, assimilation." His voice glitched. Then he stiffened, arcs flaring, until he collapsed into a heap of wet vines and metal, twitching. Valen rushed to Amethyst, chest heaving. "You okay?" She nodded, wincing as she pressed a hand to her side. "I think so." Her eyes lingered on the broken figure. "What was that thing?" He shook his head grimly. "Some bioengineered creation left behind. Probably a secret project. The station owners might have known but never told anyone." She knelt by Calyx's inert form, frowning. "I can still feel faint flickers of life. Should we?" Valen's jaw tensed, remembering the savage strength of that attack. "We can't risk it. This creature wanted the crystal. Let's get whatever proof we need to show the mechanic we found the stash, then get out of here." Reluctantly, Amethyst agreed. She snapped a few images on the data pad, showing the container and Calyx's form. They found a small console inside the container that might contain valuable data, likely what the mechanic was after. Then they carefully retreated, leaving the watery chamber behind. Valen's ribs ached with each step, but he pressed on. When they emerged back on the station's main level, battered and dripping, The mechanic's assistant looked both alarmed and intrigued. They produced the console, explaining the monstrous cyborg. The assistant only shrugged. The boss might pay extra for that. Valen's anger flared. We nearly died down there. That thing is still alive, as far as we know. You'd better lock it down. The assistant gave a noncommittal grunt, then handed over a credit chip that matched the cost of repairs. We'll fix your ship. Done deal. If the boss wants more from you, he'll let you know. Valen pocketed the chip, exchanging a glance with Amethea. Her posture was stiff, eyes scanning the corridors. She clearly wanted to be off this station as soon as possible. Back in their rented quarters, they collapsed onto the bunk. Valen couldn't help noticing the bruises forming along her arm and hip. He gently brushed a knuckle across her skin, wincing in sympathy. I'm sorry, he murmured. I wish there was a way to make this easier. She let out a shaky breath, leaning into his touch. As long as we have each other, and the crystal, I can face it. He bent his head, kissing her shoulder. Soon we'll leave. We'll head for your home. And maybe after that, a place we can breathe. She cupped his face in her hands. I want that, she whispered. Then her eyes flicked to the pack containing the communion fragment. I want us to survive this, together. He nodded, determination surging. We will. Repairs on the ship took another grueling day. During that time, they kept a low profile, venturing out only for food or to check on the mechanic's progress. The station's corridors buzzed with rumors about the underbelly discovery. Some spoke of a horrifying biomechanical being, others speculated about hidden treasure. Valen kept Amethea close, hood up, not wanting any attention drawn to the relic. At last, the repairs were done. The mechanic grumbled about the difficulty of sourcing parts, but grudgingly admitted the ship was flight-worthy. Valen and Amethea wasted no time. They settled their remaining rental fees, gathered supplies, and slipped away to the docking bay. As they prepped for launch, a tremor of unease gnawed at Valen. The station felt on the brink of unraveling. Maybe it was just paranoia after everything they'd been through, but he couldn't shake the sense that they needed to leave fast. With the engines humming steadily, they lifted off from the docking clamps. Amethea sat in the co-pilot seat, tail wrapped nervously around the base of her seat. Valen engaged the thrusters, guiding the ship out of the station's orbit and into open space. Coordinates? He asked, glancing her way. She plugged in a set of star charts. If we pass by the Hellion Rift, we can jump to the outer systems near my people's territory. Then I'll guide you the rest of the way. He nodded, adjusting the flight path. Got it. A swirl of stars filled the viewport as the ship accelerated, leaving the station behind. A sigh of relief escaped him. Good riddance. She breathed a small laugh, though worry still lingered in her eyes. It's not over yet. My people are in conflict. There are factions that might see the crystal as a weapon. Others revere it as sacred. We have to be cautious. He reached over, taking her hand. Whatever comes, we face it together. Her fingers squeezed his, a grateful glimmer in her gaze. I still can't believe I found you in that derelict outpost. Or that you stayed. He turned his attention forward, smiling softly. It feels like fate, if I believed in that. They entered faster than light, the ship humming as starlines streaked past the cockpit windows. A strange calm washed over them, a lull in the perpetual storm of danger. She dozed off in the co-pilot's seat, and he found himself content just to watch her breathe. The battered soldier in him marveled at how swiftly she'd become everything to him. When the jump ended, they emerged near the Hellion Rift, a cosmic anomaly of swirling nebulae and gravitational distortions. The ship's sensors went haywire for a moment, but Amethea made quick adjustments, stabilizing the flight path. They skirted the edges of the rift, cosmic lightning flickering in the distance. After a few more micro-jumps, they entered a region of space more alien than any Valen had seen before. Amethea's homeland was rumored to be a cluster of worlds orbiting a binary star system, with their technology blending organic and crystalline elements. As they approached, she grew visibly anxious, fiddling with her crest and scanning the sensor readouts. There! She pointed at a greenish planet with swirling white clouds. That's my birthplace, though I was exiled years ago. A hint of sorrow tinged her voice. But if we're to restore the crystal, we have to start there. The main shrine is located in the capital city. Valen studied the readouts. We're getting signals. Some kind of orbital station. We should declare our intention to land. Amethyst hesitated, chewing her lip. If they don't shoot us down first. My name might be on some watch list. He set his jaw. Then we land quietly. Is there somewhere we can approach without raising alarms? She tapped the console, bringing up a topographical map. There's a small outpost in the eastern desert, near the Temple of Resonance. We might slip in undetected if we come from the southern approach. The storms there obscure scanners. Valen nodded, adjusting the flight plan. Done. Let's hope your desert is friendlier than the last one we visited. She gave a weak smile. At least the air is breathable. Mostly. They made their descent carefully, angling around the planet's sensor grids. The closer they got, the more tense Amethyst became. He reached over, pressing a hand to her thigh. She managed a grateful nod but kept her eyes on the navigation screen. The ship punched through thick clouds, revealing a vast desert plain below. Golden sands stretched to the horizon, dotted with jagged rock formations. Unlike the lifeless world they'd escaped earlier, this desert bore signs of hardy vegetation and shimmering crystal outcrops that poked from dunes like jagged teeth. Valen found a flat expanse near a canyon and set the ship down. The landing gear held, albeit with a groan. Engines whirred down, and the cockpit lights dimmed. He exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. We made it. Amethyst stood, glancing out the viewport. Her eyes shone with emotions he could hardly fathom: relief, trepidation, and something like longing. I never thought I'd see these skies again. He approached, slipping an arm around her waist. She leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. We'll find the shrine, he said softly. We'll do what we came to do. And we'll deal with your people, whatever that means. She closed her eyes, inhaling the faint scent of desert air that seeped through the hull. Yes, she whispered. We will. They gathered supplies and cautiously stepped onto the shifting sand. A warm breeze caressed their faces, carrying the scent of minerals and distant blossoms. The sky overhead was a startling turquoise, the twin suns angled in the west. A hush spread over them, as if the land recognized Amethyst's return, uncertain whether to welcome or condemn her. She shielded her eyes, scanning the horizon. The Temple of Resonance is about a day's walk from here, if memory serves. He squinted, following her gaze. We could try to power up a ground vehicle, but the engine's on its last legs. Might be safer to go on foot to avoid detection. She nodded, adjusting the pack that held the crystal fragment. Let's walk. This desert has secrets. We should tread carefully. They set off, each step sinking into the hot sand. The suns beat down on them, but occasional breezes offered fleeting relief. As evening approached, the temperature dropped rapidly, painting the dunes in cooler hues. They made camp by a ridge of crystalline formations that glowed faintly at dusk, casting prismatic reflections across the sand. By the time they settled, night had fallen. The stars overhead were unlike any Valen had seen, vast clusters shimmering in shifting patterns. He lay on his back, Amethyst curled beside him, tail draped over his leg. They shared a meal of dried rations, washing it down with water from their canteens. At one point she stood, the moonlight highlighting the scales along her arms, her crest catching silver hues. Let me show you something, she whispered, beckoning him to follow. He rose, trailing after her to a small basin of smooth rock sheltered by the glowing crystal outcroppings. A faint trickle of water seeped there, an oasis. She knelt, dipping her fingers in and splashing her face. He joined her, the cool water on his skin a welcome relief. Then, in the soft moonlight, she turned, letting her garments slide off her shoulders. She stood bare under the twin moons, luminous patterns swirling across her skin like living tattoos. Valen swallowed hard, struck by her beauty. She reached for him, guiding his hands to her waist. A tide of longing washed over him. He carefully peeled off his own clothes, letting them drop onto a nearby rock. Their kisses were soft at first, reverent in this sacred hush. The desert night enveloped them, and the faint glow of crystal formations danced across their bodies. She pressed against him, the line of her breast grazing his chest, her breath hitching as his hands explored the ridges and smooth plains of her form. He lost himself in her warmth, the gentle rasp of scaled textures beneath his palms, the flutter of her crest when he trailed kisses down her neck. Their earlier encounters had been heated, urgent, born of near death and adrenaline. But here, under the moons of her homeland, it felt like a sacred rite. Each touch, each breath, was deliberate and tender. A soft moan escaped her parted lips when he lowered his head to taste the hollow of her throat. She cradled his head, guiding him lower. The hush of the night accentuated every sigh, every rustle of sand under their feet. Slowly, they sank onto a soft patch of moss near the water's edge, bodies entwined. She rolled onto him, her tail wrapping around his calf, their mouths meeting in a languid dance of tongues. The shimmer of her bioluminescence intensified with her rising passion, casting shifting patterns over both of them. He arched up, gasping at the warmth pooling in his core. The world narrowed to her size, her taste, the silken press of her thighs. When their bodies finally joined, it was slow, deliberate, an act of merging more than just flesh. A faint pulse thrummed in his mind, an echo of the communion crystal's presence. He felt a wash of emotion that wasn't only his, her longing, her devotion, her fear of rejection. In return, he bared his own soul, letting her sense the scars of his past, the hopes she had sparked in him. Tears glistened in her eyes, though a smile curved her lips. He pressed a kiss to each tear, swallowing the lump in his throat. Their rhythm built in waves, each crest lifting them higher, each low giving them space to breathe and connect. She gasped his name, voice reverent, and he held her tighter, letting the desert's silence cradle their moans. At the peak of their union, a bright surge of light erupted from her markings, and for a heartbeat, he could have sworn he glimpsed the ghostly outlines of countless ancestors drifting at the edge of his vision. It vanished as quickly as it came, leaving him breathless, heart hammering. She collapsed against his chest, trembling. In the aftermath, they lay entwined, the night breeze cooling their heated skin. She murmured something in her native tongue, words that resonated with warmth in his mind. He brushed a kiss on her brow, feeling unspoken gratitude bloom between them. Long minutes passed before either spoke. When she finally lifted her head, the tears were gone, replaced by a gentle smile. "I've never felt so connected to another being," she whispered. "It's like our souls touched." He swallowed, still reeling from the intensity. "I felt it too. I don't know how to describe it, but it was profound." She nestled against him, tail curling protectively around their legs. "I want to stay like this forever," she admitted, voice wistful. "But the temple awaits." He nodded, pressing a soft kiss to her cheek. "Tomorrow, we'll find it. And we'll finish what we started." They lingered in that oasis, listening to the gentle trickle of water and the soft hum of nocturnal creatures. When at last they rose, they cleaned themselves in the cool water, then returned to the camp. Holding each other through the desert night, they drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep, hearts beating in unison. Dawn's light found them packing up, renewed by the night's intimacy but solemn in the face of their mission. Amethea led them across rolling dunes for hours. By midday, they spotted tall spires in the distance, glinting in the harsh sunlight. As they drew closer, Valen realized these spires were made of translucent crystal, shaped into columns that spiraled toward the sky. A hush fell over them as they approached what could only be the Temple of Resonance. The entrance was guarded by two towering statues of Amethea's kind, carved from the same crystalline rock. Their expressions were fierce and noble, crest and tail meticulously depicted. Amethea swallowed, a tremor running through her. "It's been so long," she whispered, voice taut with emotion. Valen stepped forward, offering his hand. She took it, and they ascended the wide steps leading to a grand archway. The interior was cool and dim, lit by shafts of sunlight refracted through crystal walls. Intricate patterns and symbols covered the floor, forming a labyrinthine mosaic. No one greeted them. Indeed, the place seemed deserted, though an undercurrent of energy buzzed in the air. A faint hum reached Valen's ears, as though the crystals resonated with each footstep. Amalthea led him deeper into the temple, her luminescence subdued. They arrived at a circular chamber with a raised dais in the center. A swirl of crystal columns surrounded the dais, forming a ring. A single shaft of light beamed from an opening in the ceiling, illuminating the center like a spotlight. Amalthea halted at the threshold, gripping Valen's arm. "This is where the main shard of the communion crystal once resided. If my fragment can reconnect here." She trailed off, fear and hope mingling in her eyes. Valen nodded. "Let's do it." She stepped onto the dais, carefully unwrapping the container. The fragment pulsed with violet light, as if sensing its proximity to the temple. A low vibration spread through the chamber, causing the columns to emit soft chimes. Valen felt his hair stand on end. Amalthea took a deep breath, then placed the crystal fragment onto a small pedestal at the center. The moment it touched the pedestal, the entire temple seemed to awaken. Columns flared with color, intricate lines lighting up along the walls. The hum grew louder, a thrumming pulse that seemed to reverberate in Valen's chest. Amalthea winced, stepping back. "It's strong." Valen gritted his teeth, ears ringing. "Stay with it!" he shouted over the rising noise. He placed a hand on her shoulder, steadying her. Suddenly, the hum stabilized, shifting into a harmonic tone. Patterns of light spun around the dais, coalescing into ghostly shapes that flickered in and out of view. A swirling maelstrom of memory, countless voices, glimpses of faces, echoes of an entire civilization's history. Amalthea gasped, her eyes wide. "This is it, the collective memory of my people. It's been dormant for centuries." Valen could only watch, stunned. It felt as if the chamber itself was breathing, each crystal resonating with cosmic energy. He sensed something tug at his mind, a gentle invitation. Glancing at Amalthea, he saw tears streaming down her cheeks, her crest trembling. Then, a sudden presence manifested in the center of the dais, a shimmering form that resembled an elder of her species, radiant and translucent. Its voice echoed in the chamber, though the words seemed to bypass Valen's ears and flow directly into his thoughts. "Who comes to rekindle the bond?" Amalthea bowed her head. "I am Amalthea, an exile, yet still a daughter of this land. I bring the fragment to restore unity." The elder's gaze turned to Valen. "You are not of this world. Yet you share in the bond." Valen swallowed, heart hammering. I'm here to help. To stand with her." A swirl of energy surrounded them, the dais glowing brighter. The elder's voice vibrated with sorrow and hope. "Our people have been sundered by fear and strife. This temple yearns for reconnection. Will you open your hearts to the communion?" Amalthea nodded, tears shining. "Yes. Whatever it takes." Valen hesitated, but the trust in her eyes gave him courage. "Yes," he echoed. A blinding flash enveloped them. He felt an onrush of emotions, memories not his own. For a dizzying moment, he stood in the middle of a vast crowd of her kind, their silhouettes formed of light. He saw battles, celebrations, births, and tragedies, centuries of experiences swirling around him. Overwhelmed, he nearly collapsed, but Amalthea's hand in his anchored him. He glimpsed her past, her exile, her heartbreak. She saw his battles, his regrets, the loneliness that had been his constant companion. Together, they bore witness to each other's deepest wounds. In the swirl of that communal presence, they found solace, acceptance. Then the energy receded, condensing back into the fragment, which pulsed with renewed strength. The elder's form lingered a moment longer. "The link is rekindled, if only in part," it intoned. "In time, more fragments must be gathered to restore the full communion. But you, child, have lit the path." It turned to Amalthea, expression kind. "Your exile is ended. Return to our people and guide them toward unity." Amalthea wept openly. "Thank you," she whispered. The elder's gaze settled on Valen. "And you, outsider, have shown compassion beyond your kin. Your bond with her stands testament that we need not fear those beyond our star. Then the form dissolved into shimmering motes, fading into the temple walls. A hush followed. Valen realized tears streaked his own face. He turned to Amethea, who threw her arms around him, sobbing into his shoulder. He held her tightly, heart pounding with relief and awe. After a while, she pulled back, wiping her cheeks. I felt them, she murmured. All those lives, all those hearts. They're with us again, in some small way. The crystal is only partially restored, but it's enough to begin healing. Valen smiled through his own tears. Then let's do it. Let's return to your people. She nodded, glancing at the dais. The crystal fragment glowed brighter than ever, now embedded in the pedestal. I think it stays here for now. The temple is recharging it, sustaining it. My people can come and bond with it, share memories, find unity. He slipped an arm around her. Does this mean you'll stay? She turned, pressing a tender kiss to his mouth. I'll stay long enough to ensure the unity isn't broken again. But I want you by my side. We'll travel, gather other fragments if they exist. And if I can help your people one day, I will. He let out a shaky laugh, relief flooding him. I'd like that. Seems we have a life of adventure ahead. She rested her forehead against his, luminous patterns shimmering in new, vibrant hues that spoke of joy. And a life of love, she whispered. He closed his eyes, letting her words wash over him. After years of drifting aimlessly, he had finally found a place he belonged, at her side, forging a new future across the stars. Outside the temple, the twin suns shone bright upon the desert. They descended the steps hand in hand, the weight of the past lifted. In the distance, a small group of her kin approached cautiously, drawn by the temple's reawakened call. Amethea squared her shoulders, raising her crest with quiet dignity. Valen stood beside her, ready to face whatever questions or challenges came. In that moment, as the wind stirred the dunes and the sky arched overhead, he felt the hum of the communion crystal faintly in his chest, a promise of shared destinies. They would face the unknown together, forging a bond that transcended species, culture, and fear. And as her people gathered around, some dropping to their knees in awe, Valen and Amethea exchanged a glance filled with hope. He gently brushed his fingers against hers, recalling the first time she tasted his skin in that dark corridor, how odd and thrilling it had felt. Now, under the warm light of her homeworld, they stood revealed, unafraid. She offered him a small smile, the meaning clear: this is only the beginning. And so it was. Together, they would shape a future where hearts and minds could unite across any frontier, where love could blossom even in the ashes of exile and war. He gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, and she squeezed back, her luminescent patterns glowing brighter than the sun's. Their story was far from over, but for the first time, they both knew it was truly theirs to write.